Frank Carter, 67 years old, was sipping his morning coffee on the porch when the roar of heavy machinery broke the quiet. He paused mid-sip, the familiar taste of black coffee lingering on his tongue. Across the porch rail, the morning sun spilled golden light over his garden beds and gravel driveway. Songbirds chirped from the sycamores that lined the property, and a light breeze rustled the faded American flag mounted near the porch steps. Everything about the scene whispered ordinary, except for that engine. Frank set down his mug and reached for the reading glasses tucked into his shirt pocket. The Willowbrook Gazette lay open on his lap, a front-page photo of last year's Summerfest catching his eye. The article was forgettable, but the photo showed a familiar face. Madeline Shore, perfectly dressed in pearls and a pink pantsuit, cutting a ceremonial ribbon. She was smiling that tight-lipped smile of hers. Just last month, she'd told Frank his mailbox shrub was threatening the aesthetic harmony of the street. He stood and stepped off the porch. His knees creaked as they always did in the morning, but his stride was steady. The gravel crunched beneath his boots as he moved toward the noise. At the end of his driveway, just past the row of tomato planters he'd installed 2 seasons ago, a crew of workers were unloading fencing panels and thick rolls of orange safety netting. A flatbed truck idled nearby, the smell of diesel hanging in the humid July air. Frank's brow furrowed. His eyes scanned the signs already staked into the ground. Future Site, Willowbrook Community Playground, in cheerful blue letters, followed by "Brought to you by your HOA." He cleared his throat. One of the workers turned. "Morning, sir," the man said, adjusting his hard hat. "We'll be laying the mulch base today. The equipment should be here in about an hour." Frank looked from the man to the driveway, his driveway, which was already half covered in survey flags and neon green spray paint. A wheelbarrow full of gravel had been dumped inches from the edge of his vegetable beds. "I wasn't informed about this," Frank said, keeping his voice even. "HOA's orders," the worker replied. "We were told this parcel was greenlit last week." Frank turned without another word and walked back toward his porch, only to find Madeline Shore herself approaching from the sidewalk, a clipboard tucked under her arm and that same photo smile fixed in place. "Good morning, Frank," she said brightly, as if the air didn't already smell like motor oil and upheaval. "Madeline," he greeted, measured. "I just wanted to stop by and let you know how excited we are. The community's been needing a family-friendly recreation space for years, and we finally found the perfect spot." She gestured broadly as if unveiling a masterpiece. Frank folded his arms. "That's my driveway." She gave a theatrical little laugh. "Frank, nobody uses this space but you. It's barely a driveway anymore. It's mostly just garden and gravel. This will help bring the neighborhood together. You might even enjoy having some cheerful noise around." Frank didn't smile. "That space is part of my parcel. It's legally designated as a private easement. It was part of the original Carter homestead before Willowbrook even had a name." Madeline's smile didn't falter. "Frank, I know you've been here a long time, and we all appreciate your history. But the HOA voted, and it was unanimous. You'll adjust." He stared at her for a long moment. A few houses down, Walter Jenkins stood by his mailbox, arms crossed, pretending to read yesterday's Gazette. He wasn't fooling anyone. Most of the block was probably watching from behind curtains, wondering what the old man would do next. "Who gave you access to build on my land?" Frank asked. She tapped her clipboard. "The paperwork's in order. It's for the good of the neighborhood, and you'll be pleased to know we're naming the playground path after the Carter family. A nod to your legacy." Frank looked past her at the wheelbarrow and the flags, at the workers unrolling fencing where his driveway used to be. One of them had already parked a mini excavator just inches from the tool shed he'd built with his father when he was 12. "You didn't answer my question," he said. Madeline sighed. "Frank, this doesn't have to be difficult. We all want peace. Cooperation. You can take up any concerns at the next HOA meeting. When is it? August? That's 4 weeks from now. Well, she said, stepping back, that's the schedule. She pivoted smoothly and walked back down the sidewalk like nothing was wrong. Frank stood there a while longer, the warm wind tugging at his shirt collar. The workers resumed hammering. The engine on the excavator coughed to life, and the sound of progress hummed through the quiet neighborhood. By the time Frank made his way back to the porch, the sun had risen a little higher, casting sharper shadows on the faded planks beneath his boots. He reached for his coffee mug, still warm. Then he noticed something that hadn't been there 20 minutes earlier. A fresh pile of gravel had been dumped directly at the mouth of his driveway, blocking any chance of backing his truck out of the garage. Frank slowly set his coffee cup down. They really have no idea what they're doing. Frank and his sister Helen sat across from each other in the Bluebird Diner, staring down at a worn survey map from 1974 as they placed their order for lemon pie and coffee. The diner smelled like cinnamon toast and freshly brewed coffee, the kind of scent that seemed baked into the wood-paneled walls after 50 years of early morning chatter. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting warm squares across the glossy oak tables. The hum of quiet conversation, the clink of forks on plates, the low hiss of the kitchen griddle. It all blended into the peaceful rhythm of Willowbrook's favorite breakfast spot. Helen reached into her tote bag and pulled out a manila folder filled with yellowing documents. Frank leaned over, his finger tracing the boundary lines that curved across the old Carter property. The paper crackled under his touch. "They kept this in the basement all those years?" she asked, peering over the rim of her glasses. "Grandpa labeled everything by hand," Frank said. "Every parcel, every easement, even the soil reports. He didn't trust anyone else to get it right." Helen shook her head, half in admiration, half in disbelief. "They don't make folks like that anymore." Their server, Betty, appeared with 2 steaming mugs and set down plates of lemon pie, still cool from the fridge, and topped with delicate swirls of whipped cream. "2 pies, extra forks in case you share," Betty winked. "And Frank? That shady business out front your place. It's got half the town whispering." Frank gave a polite nod. "Just looking into it." After she walked away, Helen leaned in, lowering her voice. "Back in Arizona, my HOA made me tear down my bean trellis. Said it cast a visual burden on the neighboring lots." "Visual burden?" It was a wooden frame and some snap peas. Frank offered a dry smile. "Madeline would have fit right in." Helen flipped open the folder and unfolded a property grid marked Lot 15, her brow furrowed. "Here, look, it's right here in the notes. Easement retained. Private ingress, egress, non-transferable." Frank's eyes narrowed. "Which means HOA rules don't apply. This strip, my driveway, it's protected." Helen tapped her finger against a faded red stamp. "These are county-recorded documents, not just Grandpa's notes." Frank sat back, thoughtful. Time to call the clerk. He pulled out his flip phone, still stubbornly attached to old technology, and found the number he needed. Helen used the moment to skim through another sheaf of papers. "Willow County Clerk's Office. This is Nancy." The voice on the other end answered. "Nancy Tran. It's Frank Carter." "Hi, Frank," she said warmly. "Let me guess. This is about the construction in front of your place?" "You've heard?" "Oh, honey, half the staff has family on Willow Creek Drive. You're the talk of the lunchroom." Frank chuckled lightly. "I need to verify something. Lot 15, my lot, has a recorded easement, doesn't it?" "Yes, recorded in 74. You're not subject to subdivision controls. What's more, hold on, I'm pulling up the permit database." Helen listened, eyes wide. Nancy returned after a pause. "The playground permit? It was approved for Lot 17. That's 2 parcels over from yours." "Not Lot 15?" Frank asked, already knowing the answer. "No, sir. If they're building on your land, Someone's made a mistake. An expensive one? Frank glanced at Helen. She raised an eyebrow. Or a very intentional one, she whispered. A familiar chime came from Frank's phone, a new email. He opened it with a practiced scowl, muttering under his breath. Speak of the devil. It was from the HOA vice president. The message was curt, impersonal, and carried the weight of authority they loved to flaunt. Mr. Carter, you are in violation of community cohesion guidelines by impeding a unanimously approved HOA initiative. Immediate compliance is expected. Helen read over his shoulder and let out a short laugh, but it didn't reach her eyes. They're accusing you of being an obstacle to the neighborhood. How thoughtful. Frank's thumb hovered over the reply button. They have no idea I'm the one who signed the development permits for this entire grid 15 years ago. Helen shook her head slowly. Then you know exactly what they're doing. I do? The pie sat forgotten between them as the weight of realization settled in. The playground wasn't just a misguided project, it was a blatant land grab, draped in cheerful community language. Nancy's voice came back through the speaker. Frank, I'm going to flag this on our end. Someone may have shifted the location post-approval, but there's no amendment on file. If they're building on your lot, they're out of bounds. He thanked her and ended the call. Helen slid the map back in front of him. They're not just building on the wrong lot. Frank stared at the faded grid lines, his expression tightening. Frank looked at the map, eyes narrowing. They built on the wrong lot, and they know it? The emergency HOA meeting was already underway in the Willowbrook Community Hall, and Frank Carter's name was nowhere on the invitation list. The hall had the usual trappings: scuffed linoleum floors, rows of cold metal folding chairs, a sound system that hummed with feedback whenever someone adjusted the mic. Fluorescent lights flickered above as residents filled the room in murmuring clusters, some balancing paper coffee cups, others scrolling on their phones. There was an air of forced civility, like a family dinner where no one wanted to talk about the real issue. Frank stood just outside the double doors, the worn manila folder tucked under his arm. Helen leaned close and whispered, "They'll try to bury you before you say a word." He gave her a quick glance and the smallest of nods. "Let's see them try." Inside, the meeting was already in full swing. At the front, Madeline Shore stood behind a collapsible table draped in a cheap tablecloth, printed with the HOA's logo. A green leaf nestled inside a perfect circle. She was dressed in lavender today, pearls resting just so at her collar, her smile crisp and bright. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she said, projecting into the squeaky microphone. "We're gathered here to update you on a project that reflects the best of Willowbrook, a playground designed to bring our families together, promote wellness, and celebrate community values." A few polite claps trickled through the room. Madeline pressed forward. Despite unfortunate misunderstandings, we remain committed to transparency and progress. I'm pleased to report that construction is ahead of schedule. Frank stepped through the doors. The squeal of the hinges made a few heads turn. Conversations tapered off as he made his way slowly down the aisle between chairs. Several residents watched in awkward silence. Others gave quick nods. Walter Jenkins, sitting in the third row, folded his arms and leaned back as if settling in for a show. Frank reached the front without invitation. He placed the folder gently on the table beside Madeline and opened it. She tensed, but kept smiling. "Frank, this is a members-only agenda. You weren't on the list tonight." "I wasn't invited," Frank said, voice calm. "But this concerns everyone." He pulled out a copy of the building permit, crisp, official, signed with his own name. He held it up, then turned it toward the room. "This is the approved permit for the playground project," he said. "Filed last month, signed by the county planning board, and by me, because 15 years ago I was the one who signed off on every development phase of this neighborhood." The room quieted further. Even Madeline's smile began to twitch. "This permit clearly designates Lot 17 as the approved site for development," Frank continued. "What's being built now is not on Lot 17. It's on Lot 15, my land." A few murmurs rose. Helen, standing near the back, folded her arms. Deputy Harold Buckley stood up from the second row. He wore his uniform, though his badge gleamed less like authority and more like history. Buckley had been retired once, brought back part-time when the county needed someone with sense and patience. "I've reviewed the property lines myself," he said. "Lot 15 is Frank Carter's private parcel. It predates the HOA. What's being built is on the wrong lot." The silence was heavier now. Residents shifted in their seats. A young couple exchanged glances. One man, older, raised his hand tentatively. "If that's true," he asked, "why not use Lot 17? It's open and flat." Frank didn't answer. He didn't need to. The unspoken question echoed through the room. Madeline stepped forward. "Frank, we appreciate your concern, but construction plans evolve. Our intention was never to inconvenience you." "I'm not opposed to a playground," Frank said, his voice steady. "I'm opposed to you building it on my land." The words landed with weight. Madeline's jaw stiffened. Frank held her gaze for a long moment, then turned to face the residents once more. "I've spent most of my life on that land. It belonged to my grandfather before me. No one ever asked if I'd be willing to help. No notice, no hearing, just gravel and tape and equipment, rolled in under the banner of community good. That's not community. That's a land grab." A slow buzz of conversation broke out. Someone began filming with their phone. Another leaned over to whisper to a neighbor. Walter Jenkins chuckled softly and muttered, "About time." Madeline's smile returned, but this time it was brittle. "We'll file for a revised permit," she said through tight lips. "This time, by the book." Frank met her gaze without flinching. "I look forward to it." Frank woke at 6 sharp, the same way he had for decades, without an alarm, just the steady rhythm of habit. He sat on the edge of his bed, rubbed his eyes, and reached for the glass of water he kept on the nightstand. But when his gaze shifted toward the window, the water stayed untouched. A bright orange line cut through his backyard. From the second-story window, the sun still low on the horizon, he could see the plastic safety fencing snaking across his vegetable garden like a wound dressing. The zucchini row was buried under netting. The tomatoes, proud and staked just 2 weeks ago, stood awkwardly behind caution tape. Helen's voice echoed in his mind from 2 nights earlier. When the bad ones get exposed, they don't back down, they double down. He was out the door in under 5 minutes, still in his boots from the day before. The heat was already rising off the soil, waves shimmering just above ground level. The cicadas had begun their relentless drone, and the faint scent of diesel hung in the air. The crew was back. A handful of workers in neon vests were unloading a stack of pressure-treated wood and setting stakes deeper into his lot. Frank took out his phone and began snapping photos, close-ups of the fence intruding over the garden beds, wide shots showing the full span from his shed to the south fence. He zoomed in on the construction markers, careful to capture each stake with its HOA-issued tag. The foreman, a heavy-set man with a clipboard and a sunburn already forming on his neck, noticed him. "Morning," he offered, almost sheepishly. Frank didn't look up from his camera. "Who authorized this extension?" The foreman shifted on his feet. "Same job, sir. We were told the layout had been slightly updated." "By who?" The HOA board, Miss Shore's office." Frank stopped clicking. "Did they give you updated site maps?" The foreman hesitated. "We were told this was still within community land, common use zone. It's all on the plan we got last week." Frank nodded slowly. You might want to double-check that. Back inside, Helen was already at the kitchen table, her hair still damp from a quick shower. She had Frank's laptop open and a yellow notepad in front of her. They've been spending out of the beautification fund, she said. A lot. Over 90 grand since February. He poured coffee. Playgrounds don't cost that much. No, she said, flipping to a printed statement. But sidewalks, consulting fees, landscape renderings, those add up fast. And all of it was moved through the budget with vague line items like community enhancement and amenity upgrades. Frank leaned over the table. Was any of it approved through a full community vote? Helen shook her head. Meeting minutes are missing, or redacted. I only found this because an older PDF had the original ledger. The newer one, it's scrubbed. Frank picked up the phone again and called Nancy Tran. She answered after 2 rings. Willow County Clerk's office. Nancy, it's Frank. I've got an urgent one for you. Shoot. I need confirmation. Was there ever a site change submitted for the Willowbrook Playground permit? From Lot 17 to Lot 15? A pause, then the clatter of keys over the line. Number nothing on record, and if they moved it, they were required to submit a zoning variance. Frank tightened his grip on the phone. Which they didn't. Nope, in fact, she continued, Lot 17 was flagged for geological instability 5 years ago. The subsoils mostly fill from the old quarry. No playground would pass insurance review on that lot. Frank blinked. So they knew. Nancy exhaled. Looks that way. Can you send me the original planning maps? They'll be in your inbox within the hour. As he ended the call, Helen slid another document toward him. There's something else. I pulled the HOA's Articles of Amendment. The president, Madeline, signed off on an internal budget reallocation just after the permit approval. Frank didn't need to ask what that meant. The playground wasn't just a misstep. It was a redirect, a smokescreen for funds, pushed onto private land to avoid oversight. The construction foreman approached the porch slowly, hat in hand. Mr. Carter, he said, I hate to bother, but if we're not supposed to be here. Frank interrupted. You're trespassing. The man looked uneasy. Sir, I didn't know. Frank nodded. I believe you, but get your men out of my garden. Before the foreman could answer, the familiar ping of a new email chimed from Frank's phone. Subject line. Notice of pending legal action. Sender, HOA Legal Counsel. Whitmore, Banks and Shore, LLP. He opened it slowly. The message was cold and formal. Mr. Carter, your continued interference with approved community construction may constitute obstruction under HOA Article 12.3. Further action will be taken if you persist in impeding a legally ratified project. Sincerely, Counsel for Willowbrook Homeowners Association. Frank's jaw set. His thumb hovered over the reply button, but instead he handed the phone to Helen. She read it silently, then looked up, eyes sharp. Frank stared out at the bright plastic fence snaking through his garden. The workers now paused, uncertain. He hadn't even started fighting yet, and already they were threatening him with court. His phone vibrated once more. Another message, but this one was short. Just a PDF attachment titled County Parcel Overlay, Lot 15 Versus. On Yeti, he tapped it open. There, in bold, unmistakable lines, was the overlay of Willowbrook, highlighted in red and blue. Lot 15 was clearly his, clearly residential, and clearly off-limits to any public-use structures. Lot 17, shaded in gray, sat 2 lots over, marked with bold red text, unfit for development, soil hazard. He didn't say anything for a while. The hum of cicadas continued, and the heat rose. Then Helen's voice cut through. They're not just building on the wrong lot? Frank looked at the screen, eyes fixed. They were building somewhere they never should have touched at all. A few minutes later, another message came through. this time from a different address. Subject: Formal Legal Warning Body. Obstructing community progress may subject you to individual liability. You have been warned. Frank stared at it in silence. They were no longer pretending. Frank received a letter threatening personal legal action from the HOA's legal representative. Interfering with community activity may be subject to enforcement under regulation. Just before the summer storm rolled in, Frank found a document from his grandfather, a hand-drawn easement sketch and utility access, right dated 1974. It had been tucked in a leather-bound folder between tax receipts and old carbon copies of water bills. The paper had yellowed with time, the ink faded, but still legible. Frank sat at his kitchen table, lightning flashing faintly beyond the window, and stared at the simple map that could change everything. In the margin, his grandfather had written in neat cursive, "Utility access retained by Carter family. Main water line, southeast corner." Frank ran his finger along the boundary sketch and exhaled slowly. He remembered what Walter Jenkins had said last year while repairing a broken fence. "That drain at the edge of my lawn, still listed under your family, never switched hands proper." The next morning, the sky was heavy with humidity, the kind that made your shirt stick before noon. Frank stood at the edge of his backyard. The plastic fencing stretched even farther now, cutting across the corner near the utility box. The construction crew was back, this time with a backhoe and auger. One of the workers had a tape measure strung between two orange flags planted dangerously close to the marked utility line. Frank waved them down. The foreman hesitated before walking over, sweat already beading under his hard hat. Frank held out the document. "This easement predates the development. You're standing over the main water conduit for half this street." The foreman squinted at the old document. "Sir, I didn't know. No one said anything about underground lines." Frank pointed to the metal cap near the edge of his garden. "That valve controls your water. Dig into that, and the whole block's without pressure for a week." Just then, a familiar cruiser pulled up and parked by the curb. Deputy Harold Buckley stepped out, hat in hand. His tan uniform clung slightly in the heat, but he moved with steady calm. "Heard you had activity again," Buckley said, walking up. Frank handed him the easement file. Buckley flipped through it, then looked toward the heavy machinery idling in the grass. "This still on record with the county?" he asked. Frank nodded. "Verified by Nancy yesterday." Buckley glanced at the crew. "Nobody digs another inch until this is reviewed." The foreman looked relieved. "You got it. We'll power down." Frank's phone buzzed. A text from Helen. "Madeline's on her way. Brace yourself." She wasn't kidding. 20 minutes later, a silver SUV pulled into the driveway like it owned the gravel beneath it. Madeline stepped out, heels too high for the terrain, tablet in hand, her expression already tightened into something smug and annoyed. "Mr. Carter," she said curtly, skipping any pleasantries, "you've now interrupted work on a sanctioned project for the third time. This is no longer just obstruction, it's sabotage." Buckley raised a brow. "Not if he owns the land, and not if he has recorded rights." Madeline turned toward the deputy. "With respect, this project was approved through a unanimous board vote. We followed protocol." Frank crossed his arms. "Lot 15 was never part of the approval, and now you're risking damage to county infrastructure." From the edge of the sidewalk, Walter Jenkins stepped forward. "Playground's a fine idea," he said evenly, "but it don't give you permission to steal." Madeline narrowed her eyes. "No one is stealing anything." Walter gestured toward the taped-off trench. "That right there is someone else's water line. You damage that, and you're going to have more than legal headaches. You'll have 80 angry homeowners wondering why their faucets are dry." A few neighbors had started gathering near the street. Helen appeared beside Frank, holding her phone with the easement document pulled up. Frank walked to the water valve, pulled open the cover, and twisted the handle slightly. A hiss of pressure released beneath their feet, a deep gurgle sounding from the pipes. "If I shut this," he said calmly, "half the homes on Brookside won't get a drop." Madeline's face flushed. "You wouldn't dare," she hissed. "I wouldn't have to," Frank replied. "All I'd need is a repair permit or a blockage report. Either would require the HOA to halt construction until it's resolved." Buckley stepped between them. "Enough. The Carter easement is legitimate. I'll be filing a notice with the county. Construction is to stop immediately. And Madeline," she snapped her gaze toward him, "you'll need to answer for this in front of a judge. 7 days." The foreman gave the signal. Engines cut off one by one. The machines powered down with a hiss and a hum, the sound of surrender. Madeline turned toward Frank, her voice low and venomous. "I'm not the only one who knows how to bend a rule, Mr. Carter." Frank didn't flinch. He simply looked at her, steady as the old oak behind his shed, and said nothing. The residents of Willow Brook filled every seat in the town hall that evening, some clutching lemon bars wrapped in foil, others holding worn HOA violation letters like quiet declarations of war. Frank stood near the back, a flash drive in his pocket, Helen at his side. The air buzzed with something more than anticipation. It was a strange mix of tension and hope. Murmurs swirled among the rows of folding chairs as neighbors who once barely made eye contact now exchanged stories. On one side, a mother in her 30s passed out lemon squares to those around her. Across the aisle, Walter Jenkins unfolded a 3-year-old citation for improper mailbox dimensions and shook his head. "You ready?" Helen asked softly. Frank gave her a slight nod. "As I'll ever be." She smiled, remembering her own words from earlier that morning. "Some days justice needs a peach cobbler and the patience of an entire town." Deputy Harold Buckley stood near the front, arms folded, nodding occasionally to familiar faces. At the podium, a reporter from the local TV station adjusted her camera. The HOA board members sat in a line of metal chairs, Madeline Shore in the middle, spine straight as a flagpole, lips pursed. When the meeting was called to order, it was Frank who stepped forward first. He spoke plainly, holding the microphone in one hand and his folder in the other. "This isn't about me," he began. "It's about all of us." Then, one by one, he laid it out. Projected onto the portable screen behind him were slides, the misused beautification fund records, the forged timeline showing construction approval that never happened, and aerial maps that made it clear Lot 15, his land, had been claimed without permission. Nancy Tran took the floor next. She was calm, precise. "As of today," she said, "no county record shows authorization for construction on Lot 15. All active permits apply solely to Lot 17. No amendments were filed." The room rippled with soft gasps. Madeline sat motionless, staring forward. Walter Jenkins rose slowly. "I lived here 32 years, he said, voice hoarse. "They fined me for wind chimes once, said they made too much sound." Laughter broke the tension, but only briefly. One by one, more stood. A young mother with twins spoke of being warned for sidewalk chalk drawings. An elderly woman described being harassed over garden gnomes. Helen stepped up last. "I moved here to retire," she said. "I didn't expect to feel like a criminal for planting daisies. My brother tried to warn you. This land matters." Then came the final slide. Frank clicked to the email chain between Madeline and a contracting firm. "Build the playground, Positive Optics. Once it's in, we push Phase 2, small parking expansion along Lot 15. Private use? Initially, then rezone." The room fell into stunned silence. Frank let it linger. "Community," he said, "doesn't mean taking without asking." Madeline stood abruptly. "This is a smear campaign," she snapped. A petty personal attack because one man didn't want to share his land. This is hearsay, misinterpreted emails. "Then let's vote," Walter said from the front row. A second later, Helen raised her hand. "I second it." A hush, then a cascade of hands, raised high. Deputy Buckley took count. 89 votes in favor, he announced. Motion passed. Effective immediately, the current HOA board is dissolved. Applause erupted, sharp and joyful. A few stood and hugged. Someone began handing out peach cobbler from a foil tray. Helen wiped at her eyes and offered Frank a slice. He took it, dazed but smiling. Near the back, Madeline gathered her bag with tight motions and disappeared into the night, her heels clicking hollowly against the tile. The hall began to empty slowly, neighbors chatting, clapping backs, sharing long overdue words. Frank sat with Helen at the edge of the stage, cobbler on his plate, watching the room transform from battle zone to something closer to what it used to be. Helen nudged him and held up a small, faded map. "I found this in the easement file," she said. "See here? Ancestral well, beneath Lot 15. Frank leaned in, squinting. "That old stone cap?" "I always thought it was just a marker." Helen grinned. "Turns out this land's more valuable than we ever knew." Frank looked across the room, the friends, the families, the small-town heart that had stood beside him, and smiled. As the lights dimmed in the town hall and neighbors shared slices of peach cobbler, something deeper settled across Willowbrook, a quiet knowing that justice, once stirred, cannot be buried under paperwork and politeness. Frank's quiet stand had reminded them all that land isn't just property. It's memory, history, and belonging. Sometimes it takes just one voice, steady as a fence post, to hold the line against those who forget what community truly means. And like good soil after a summer storm, truth has a way of rising to the surface.